There is one absolutely essential piece of equipment that you need on your boat if you plan to sail solo or even two-handed offshore where one person may be asleep, and that is a decent autopilot. And the best autopilots, generally speaking, are those that are fully built into your boat, so the majority of the components are out of the weather. And if you have the purity and the pleasure of having a boat with a stick, a tiller steered boat, then you have some challenges around how to install a fully enclosed out of the weather system. And in this episode I'm going to be talking about the best, I think, solution to that problem. I'm going to be installing the pilot on my project raceboat. This is an SJ320 that I've had for a few months and have done a fairly big refit on, and we are now in the water, and I'm now continuing with the bits that I need to get on the boat to get this boat out racing in 2025. Welcome back to Refit and Sail. My name's George Isted. I refit and repair boats for a living. Most of the boats that get featured on my channel are client boats, but occasionally I get to feature my own boat, and this is it. This is my SJ320. There has been a series of videos on this boat covering the refit of this because it was bought in a very, very sorry state. So it was launched, I'm going to say, about 2 weeks ago now, and over the last 9 episodes I have done an awful lot to this boat. So I have stripped the bottom back to gel coat, let it dry, re-epoxied it, and then re-anti-fouled it. The keel was very, very rusty, so I had done a whole load of work sorting that out, filling and fairing it, and making the bottom absolutely chef kiss perfect. The rudder has been off and has been repaired, the bearings have been checked, the engine has had a lot of servicing work done on it, so that's all good. The leg has been off, replaced the sail drive, put it back on. I've done some structural repairs to the forward end of the boat where it was flexing a little bit, and it needed that because the boat slams a bit and there was some flexing. This is hull number 3, so this was kind of almost a test boat, I think, in the early days of building these SJ320s, and they were kind of learning how to build them. Generally speaking, structurally, she's been really good. What else have I done? I've had the rig off, all new standing rigging because it was very old, and lots of servicing of deck gear, all new electronics package. And as an addition to that electronics package, in this episode we are going to be installing the autopilot. Right, let's talk about pilots for a minute. Now, they've been around for years and years and years, and they have become increasingly complex and clever. So in the early days of pilots, you would just simply set up a compass course and it would steer a compass course, and as things have evolved, they've become more and more intelligent. They could have more integrations with other electronics on your boat, and you could then steer to a wind angle or steer to a position on a chart plotter or multifunction display, and things have just continued to evolve right up to these days, where you can have systems that are installed where you have multiple different modes, and you can have an upwind mode, a downwind mode, a heavy weather mode upwind, a heavy weather downwind, and all sorts. So you can adjust these things on the fly depending on how complex a system that you want. I have bought, in a previous episode for this boat, I have bought one of these. This is a Simrad TP32. This is my backup pilot. This isn't going to be my main pilot, but this is what you commonly see on tiller steered boats. They do work pretty well. There is one big drawback. One, it's out in the elements. They tend to get wet and they tend to draw in moisture, and they do tend to fail. Now, you can put covers on them, you can just be careful with them, but unfortunately they are not as robust as a fully built-in solution. So I bought one to keep me going and get the boat sailing, but this is my backup, and I have bought a much better solution. On my previous boat, I had a Raymarine Evolution pilot on my Contessa 32. That was fantastic, and the reason I fitted that was because the Raymarine Evolution tiller pilot system is pretty much the only built-in tiller pilot solution that only has a ram on the deck that doesn't need a rudder reference unit. Now, a rudder reference unit is really important for the computer, for your autopilot system, to work out where the rudder's pointing and where the boat's pointing, and how much input it's given to the rudder. And it learns from these things. They do learn normally the more they are used, and they build up a map internally of how far to put the rudder over on a particular course with a particular wind direction to see how the boat responds, and they get better the more you use them. And now the Raymarine Evolution pilot doesn't need a rudder reference unit on the tiller drive system. It does some sort of magic, and it just works. I had one on my Contessa and it was fantastic. I think it would be improved with a rudder reference unit, but it's very hard to fit one of those when you just have a tiller outside, because the rudder reference units aren't waterproof, at least the off-the-shelf ones that you see for below decks built-in systems. On my Westerly Sea Lord, I also had a Raymarine Evolution pilot, so I had the largest one, the ACU 400 controller. It was all below decks. I already had a rotary drive attached to the pedestal, and that worked faultlessly, so I sailed the boat to the Caribbean and back. I did also have a wind pilot on there as well, but again, top marks to Raymarine, fantastic pilot. However, on this boat, I have a tiller, but I also have a full suite of B&G on this boat. And now I could fit a Raymarine pilot, and I very, very nearly did, because the two do integrate reasonably well. You can't control the Raymarine pilot from a B&G chart plotter, for example, but in terms of getting wind data and passing other data, it would be absolutely fine. However, I wanted to go for a B&G end-to-end solution, so I have bought a NAC2 pilot controller computer, and I'm going to be fitting a special sort of RAM. Now, like I said, the B&G system does need a rudder reference unit, and that is the difficult bit. So I have got what they call their SD10 pilot RAM, and I'm going to unbox it in just a minute. Right, before we get to the RAM, here are the bits that I have bought. So this is the NAC2 Autopilot computer. It's basically a black box. You connect it into the rest of the NMEA 2000 network, and it does magic. Basically, this works out where you want to go, what sort of steering input you need, and controls the motor of the drive unit. It also obviously takes in numerous different levels of data. That is it out of its plastic wrapper. So this is the NAC2 Autopilot controller, and it is fairly straightforward to fit, I believe. Power goes in there, cables go out there to the drive unit, rudder feedback would plug into there, and that is the network port that connects up to the NMEA 2000 network, and there's a whole bunch of cables in there as well, so I won't go through those. I also have, they've given me a cabling kit. I say they've given me, I have paid for this, just in case you're wondering, but the important bit is also this device here, which is the Precision 9 compass. So this is a compass unit that you mount in the boat, super accurate compass unit. I think it's probably very similar in operation to the compass unit I've got with the Orca system I've got. In fact, I did wonder at one point whether I needed this, and I could have used the Orca compass, but basically I didn't want to test that on my boat, and this kind of comes as a kit. So I have this compass to drive data to the autopilot unit. There is one bit that I had already pre-installed on this boat. So you need a controller or control pad of some sort and a display for running your pilot. There are a couple of ways you can do that. One is you can do it through a B&G MFD, or you fit, as I have done, a Triton 2 display, and I've put a separate keypad next to the display. Behind me you can see the three B&G Tritons that I've got up there. They've all got their covers on, but here we have the pilot controls. I put them here because it's going to be closer to where I'm going to be helming the boat, so it's really easy for me to just steer the boat and then hit auto and get the thing working. So we have, and these are new, so they're quite difficult to get off. There we go. That is the keypad, and that's the Triton 2 display. So that is the control box, the buttons that I'll be pressing to make it work, and this is going to be showing me the data, but I'm also going to be using this to set up the pilot system. Now, I think you can make life slightly easier for yourself by setting it up if you have a B&G multifunction display, as in a Vulcan or Zeus display, but I've been assured that you can do it all through here. It's perhaps not quite as visually easy to kind of go through all the different menu systems, but we're going to be going with this for the time being because I have a very small budget for this boat in the grand scheme of things, and right now buying a chart plotter is kind of out of budget when I've got so many other things that I need to do to try and get this boat competitive. The wind is picking up and there are some very dark clouds around here, so before it starts raining I'm going to introduce you to the drive unit. Now, this is going to be probably the most complex part of the install because I have to work out a way of fitting it and mounting it and attaching it to the tiller. This is the drive unit that I have to mount somewhere, probably in the cockpit locker, so it's out of the wet, and attached to this Obviously the big motor there, attached to it is this thing here, which is the rudder reference unit that sends data back to the NAC2 pilot controller. But how does this apply thrust to the tiller, you ask? Well, that is quite simply done through a long cable. So this has a control cable that looks a little bit like this. So one end of this will go into the motor. The other end of this cable mounts via this thing, which I need to bolt up somewhere in the aft cabin here and make a hole in the side of the cockpit so that this can poke out and attach to the tiller using this little bracket here. And I'm going to have to probably get some sort of stainless steel bracket made up to mount this on the tiller. So it has a pin, so it is removable, but the great thing about having this solution here is that it's permanently connected. So it's just like a below decks ram, it has a clutch in it. So when the pilot is off, the clutch is disengaged, so you can steer normally. But as soon as you want to use the pilot, you obviously hit go, and then the clutch engages, and then the motor is connected to the steering. So it just does it automatically, and there's none of that faffing around trying to clip a ram on. And that was my biggest bugbear with the Evolution pilot that I had on my Contessa, is that when you wanted to clip the ram onto the tiller, and the tiller's wiggling around a bit because you might be out in some weather, and the pilot might be trying to move, if you've already switched it on, which was generally not the right thing to do, it's better to clip it on and press go, but getting it to clip on in a seaway in a rush was always a bit of a faff, and I would sometimes be swearing at it for 20 seconds trying to get the end of the tiller ram to attach to the tiller. That problem is completely solved because this thing is permanently connected. We just hit go, clutch engages, and the pilot is driving the boat. Now, in terms of installing this, I think the electrical side of installing this is going to be pretty straightforward. It just needs power, needs to be networked, and everything obviously needs to be appropriately sized on the power cabling. So that is going to be all very, very straightforward. Installing the ram is going to be considerably harder, and helpfully I haven't included any instructions in the box with the SD10, so I'm going to go and have a quick look on the B&G website because I know the instructions are there because I've already seen them. Normally when you fit a pilot system there are some critical dimensions about where the ram needs to fit, so I've just assembled this, where this needs to fit in relation to the pivot point for the tiller, so the centre of the rudder stock. So if you can imagine, this is going to be mounted kind of here but below decks, and it's going to be attached to the tiller, that end onto the motor, and yeah, I've just got to do some figuring out. Right, well, I found the instructions for the SD10 on the B&G website, and I have been reading said instructions, which any man will know does not come naturally, but it gave me the critical dimensions that I needed to work out where things are going to fit. So I'm going to scroll the camera down, and you can see down here, this is obviously the bottom end of my tiller where I'm going to be attaching this thing here. I've worked out how far the tiller is going to swing because there is a maximum stroke for this unit, which is 12 inches, and there is a maximum distance that you can go from the pivot point, the center of the rudder stock. To get the maximum stroke that I want, so I can get the tiller all the way hard over, I'm going to be well within the maximum length from the center of the stock. So with lots of measuring, which I won't bore you with, it's going to be roughly here, and I've got a mark on there, which means that I can now transfer 90 degrees angle to go across to the side of the cockpit here, which is obviously just behind the tiller, conveniently for where the camera is. I can go across here and work out where this needs to come out the side of the cockpit. So I'm effectively going to have to drill a hole here and then waterproof around this to mount this. That's the next piece of the puzzle. I'm going to take the headlining down in the aft cabin, which is down there, and I'm possibly going to go and get a drill and drill a very small hole through here so that I know where I need to be And then when it comes to mounting this, I'll obviously drill a much larger hole for this to go through, because it will need a degree of movement, because as the tiller turns, the angle of this is going to alter very slightly. So if I drill a small hole, hopefully I can get away with knowing the position fore and aft of where this needs to go, and then once this is mounted I can drill the big hole and get it done. So that is the plan. I think this is the hardest bit, if I'm honest, of the whole process. I'm going to have to get a bracket made to go down onto the bottom of the tiller, but again, I have a plan for that. I'm going to simply get a fabricator friend of mine to make up a U-shaped piece of stainless that goes on here with a tab that comes out the side with a hole in it, and on that tab there will be hopefully an 8mm hole, and I can literally mount this through that tab. This does not need to be central on the tiller, central in the boat. As long as when the tiller is center and that is mounted to there, this will kind of work and pull itself in and out quite happily. So effectively you're on the wrong side of the boat, but that's going to get mounted something like that. This is a quick release pin, so should I have a problem with the clutch on the motor, I can actually disengage the drive unit, but hopefully that won't be necessary. So yeah, bit of U-shaped stainless on there with a tab coming out the side, bolt that on, quick release fitting onto the drive cable, and it should work. That's the theory. This is all new to me, so you know, I'm learning as I do this as well. First time I've installed one of these. It's very exciting because I've kind of wanted this sort of solution on one of my boats for ages. This is kind of one of the benefits of having a boat within the business on which I can try out new products and new ways of doing things, because I think this would potentially be a really good solution if you wanted to put a below decks drive unit on any sailboat, and particularly I work on a lot of Contessa 32s, and at the moment the best solution for that is the Raymarine Evolution Pilot, which doesn't need a rudder reference. But for boats that are all B&G like this one, quite often customers would quite like a B&G Pilot. Whether the B&G Pilot's any better than the Raymarine Pilot is up for discussion, and I guess I'll find out, because I know the Raymarine system really well. I suspect it will be much of a muchness, but we shall see. Well, you join me in the back cabin after much more measuring and head scratching and basically kind of working out the best position for mounting this fella here. It kind of needs to mount in the back here, and what is slightly annoying is, having done all the measurements, it really wants to be where this recess is moulded in for the Traveller, the main sheet Traveller. So after lots of measuring and working out the absolutely perfect position for it, I can't put it in the perfect position. I'm just going to have to put it in the position that is as close as possible to that perfect position, which is to mount it up as close as I can to the main sheet recess here, and as inboard as it will go. From there I can then work out how far down I need to come, and I can make up some spacer blocks to space this down from the seating that is the roof here, and then I can drill a hole going out through the side of the cockpit, which should be in the right place. So there's further measuring to do, but I'm not going to drill any of those holes now because it keeps trying to rain. In fact, I had hail a minute ago, and it's 4:30 and it's very cold outside. So I'm going to probably cogitate further on this overnight, because sometimes that can be a good thing before drilling big holes in your boat, and come back and drill holes tomorrow and get this hopefully mounted up. as you have hopefully just seen, there has been something that looks a little bit like progress here. The drive unit has been mounted. Sorry, this isn't the drive unit, this is the cable mounting point. I'm not entirely sure what to call this. I'll have to look up and see what it says in the instructions. But anyway, this has been mounted very loosely on the 4 bolts. It's only loosely mounted because I need to work out the height of everything in here. I'm fairly confident I'm going to have to put some little packing pieces in here just to get it at the right height. But I'm not going to know exactly the right height. I know it's approximately here. I'm not going to know exactly the right height until I make a fitting for the tiller. And the plan long term is to make a stainless steel bracket that's going to bolt to the tiller, but I need to template that. But I also would quite like to have a fitting on there this weekend, just enough to do the commissioning and setup if I can. I'm not sure if I'm going to completely get this installed this weekend, because it may be that I need to buy some more cables and stuff for the electrical part of it, but we shall see. I live in hope. However, I also have a blimmin' big hole inside of my boat now, which I need to waterproof at some point today, even if it's just a temporary waterproofing solution. But it's looking good. I think before I do anything more, I need to sort out that bracket to go on the tiller. Well folks, if you're wondering, it's very cold today. It's about 4 degrees air temperature and there's quite a nice northerly breeze blowing, so I think with the wind chill it's probably sub-zero, hence the hat, not sponsored by Harken, but it's a nice woolly hat they gave me. Anyway, I need to fit something on this tiller as a bracket, and I have found in my workshop a nice piece of, I'm going to say 4 or 5 mil carbon fibre sheet, which as a temporary solution will work very nicely, I think. So I'm just going to get this up under the tiller and do a little bit of measuring under here, and I'm thinking kind of 3 M5 fixings into the tiller, through the tiller, and a nice kind of rounded shape off here, and then a hole in it for the fixing which the ram goes onto. Will hopefully do the job, and I can either use that as the template for my stainless man, or I've got some plywood which I can replicate what I'm making here with, and I can add some extra little wings on the side. I'll give that to my stainless man, and hopefully he can make me up a nice little bracket to bolt onto here, which will maybe last longer than this carbon fibre sheet, because this may wear, I'm not sure. But either way, I want something that kind of wraps around the tiller, like a C shape that's going to go on there. So I think that's going to be more secure than just relying on 3 fixings that go through. So anyway, I think this is going to be a little bit wide. I might make this a little bit narrower, maybe 50 mils, is about 75 at the moment, and see what I can design to go on there. Well, as you can see, the sun has come out, which is very welcome, but do not be deceived. It is bitterly cold today, but I have my little carbon fibre bracket and I've just bolted on the fixing for the ram, or whatever we're calling this cable thing. I'm not entirely convinced this is actually carbon fibre all the way through. I think it's carbon on the top and bottom, and I think it's some sort of cheaper, probably glass laminate sandwiched in the middle, but for the purposes of what I'm doing today, absolutely fine. We're just trying to prove the system works, do a bit of setup, and I can use this as a template for the stainless steel. I've put some temporary fixings in here. These are not the permanent ones because I don't have enough of the right bits, so I've just put these in for now, just so that I can fit this in position. Just kind of bolt it up, and then I will go and buy some appropriate fixings a bit later, as it may be that I need some more elsewhere. And then we can kind of start connecting things up. Now theoretically all I need to do is pull this pin out and locate that there. Pop the R-clip back in, and we're getting somewhere. Excellent. Now the next thing I need to do is that I need to make sure that this is at the midpoint of its stroke for coming in and going out, and I can adjust where that midpoint is to some extent by moving this outer piece. There's adjustment on this in the clamp that is at the back here, so I'm going to have a little measure, possibly adjust that. It looks about right. Midpoint will be about 150 mil showing here, because there's 300 mils of travel, and hopefully we're about right. What I'm also going to check, if I just untie the tiller, is that I've got enough clearance here for the tiller to move going all that way. Seems fine, it's not causing a problem. That's all the way in there. That is touching now, just there out of shot, so I think I'm good. I'm good in that direction. So the tiller in the centre, we've got clearance all the way in. It's rubbing against there. All the way out is fine. So possibly going to have to elongate the hole here slightly with a little Dremel. That is easily solved. Well, I've just had another first for the boat. I've just cooked the first pizza in the oven, which was very nice. I've also ground this so that I've got a full range of movement. I've wound this out so that it is equal about when the tiller is in the central position, and I'll drill the hole up there, and I've shoved this cable through that hole and into the locker behind. Now I need to make sure there's enough freedom of movement in this cable, because this comes in and out a little bit as the helm gets pushed to and fro, but the next bit of the puzzle is to fit the motor that's going to be attached to the end of this, the drive unit. One thing that is lucky and worth noting is that this has just been bolted up directly to the underside of the deck. I thought I was going to have to put spacers in there, and I haven't needed to, so that's the right result. These fixings are way too long, but I will go and buy some shorter ones and some washers and bits and pieces that I don't have in due course, because I'm possibly going to have to buy some fixings to fit the motor, which I think is going to end up being bolted basically to this bulkhead, but on the other side. I need to see exactly where that's going to be, and whether I can actually bolt it up on my own without having another pair of hands remains to be seen, but I'll give it a go. Sometimes a neat trick when you are on your own is to slightly undersize the holes, screw your bolt or fixing, machine screw, in through the wood and kind of make your own thread in there, and sometimes that's just enough that you can then nip it up with a nut on the other side without needing an extra pair of hands. But I'll see how I go. That's kind of what I did up there. These are M6 fixings. I drilled it out to 5.5 mil, and then I forced the screw down, effectively cutting its own thread through the deck, and that has worked quite well. Nothing has spun as I've done these up, but I've only done them up pretty much finger tight, so I may still need some assistance. Let's go and have a look outside. Here is the drive motor, and I have just loosely connected the mounting bracket, this piece here, to the back of the motor using the correct orientation so that the cables come in and go out the right side of the motor. I'm just going to have to basically move this around in the locker to find the location which doesn't put too much stress on the cable which needs to go in there, because the more it's bent the harder it will be to pull it in and out because of friction as the cable kind of runs around a curve in its housing. So unfortunately it's very difficult to show you that because of limited space, so I'm just going to crack on and try and work out where this needs to go, and then I'll show you it hopefully in place. Well, you join me in the aft locker, which isn't terribly comfortable, but at least I'm out of the wind, and we have the hardware installed. So motor, cable in. This white tube is basically just a tube for the spare cable to go in, and you can see the cable goes up through the hole there to the aft cabin. Pretty simple to fit, if I'm honest. There is a bit of drag, slightly more drag on the tiller than I was really hoping for, if I'm honest. The advert or the specification does say, you know, minimal drag. I'm not sure that I entirely go along with minimal. There's more drag really than I would want, but it might get easier with time. It might be that it just needs to wear in a bit, and you know, everything's very new and probably very notchy, so by the time I've got a few 100 miles on the boat, it may get easier. So I will give it the benefit of the doubt for now. One thing I do need to do with the helm in the central position is I need to take this thing out here and reset the central position, because that's the rudder reference unit and it has a couple of little dots on it, and you basically have to take it out, line the dots up and pop it back in when the tiller is in the dead ahead position. So I'm going to do that next, and then basically all the hardware stuff is done. Just need to run these cables across the boat that way through the bulkhead into the port aft cabin, and that's where I'm going to be mounting the NAC 2 Autopilot controller. Tea is just being brewed because it is the end of the afternoon and it's not too long, unfortunately, until the sun is going to disappear and it's going to get even colder. But most of the outside stuff is done, apart from waterproofing that opening there, which I'll come on to in just a second. Down below I have run the cables across the back of the boat, and I have installed the NAC 2 pilot computer up there, because basically that is as far as the cables would run, and then I've got a data cable and a power cable just dangling down, which are going to get run around the boat. The data connection will go into the network, and the power is going to run along there through and into the switch panel, which is just there. So that's going to be pretty straightforward. Now, in terms of waterproofing this hole, obviously whatever I put in there needs to be able to move, because this is going to move as the arm pulls in and out. So what I'm going to try and use is this thing here. I've got two sizes of these kind of rubber flexible gaiter things. It's a bit like a boot of a CV joint, but this is actually a marine thing, so you know, obviously it's more expensive. It's actually for steering cables, and I think it's going to do the job. This just about fits over here, and with a bit of grease the shaft will be able to push in and out, and this has quite a lot of flexibility, so I'm hoping that with a little bit of silicone or something like that, just to fit this in place, it's going to do the job and stop water ingress into the boat. At least that is the plan, but I'm not sure whether I'm going to have time to fit this today, because I've got tea to drink, and to be perfectly honest with you, I'm more interested in doing the electrical cabling inside out of this very cold wind. So for this evening, that might just get a bit of tape over it just to kind of stop the worst of any water going in. The other reason I don't want to fit this is there's a grease nipple there, and I haven't got my grease gun here to pump this bit full of grease, which is possibly why it's a little bit stiffer than I would like. So I'm going to come back tomorrow with my grease gun, hopefully, if I remember to get it, pump this full of marine grease, and there's a grease nipple on the inside as well, which might need a little bit of greasing, and then this can get put in place and hopefully the boat will be waterproof. Well folks, it is now the next day and it is just as cold and still pretty windy if I'm honest, but I got down here early and I've finished up all the wiring in there. So I just had to extend the power cable for the NAC 2 and I've run that around and it's now popping out right here. So all I now need to do is to stick a fuse on the end of this and wire it into the Autopilot switch, which is going to be working both the new Autopilot, but it's also going to be powering the old one. It's all going to be on the same circuit. There is a breaker in the system, but I can't quite read on the breaker what it's rated to, so that's why I'm putting in an extra fuse, because there was one in the wiring loom for the Pilot anyway, so I see no harm in putting an extra one in for the time being. This is kind of temporary, this wiring. There is going to be a bit of a rewire and a rethink on the battery situation on this boat, and at that point I will do what I normally do, which is actually to run a decent sized Pilot off of a relay. So I'll have the power directly coming off of the batteries or off the bus bars that are next to the batteries, and the switch will just operate the relay, and that way you know you've got good wiring that is appropriately sized for a decent sized Pilot. But for now I'm just going to be wiring directly into this and hopefully all will be well. Time will tell. There's not much more to say than that. I'm looking forward to it, doing some commissioning stuff, and I'm kind of hoping it all just springs to life. Now, I don't know if you're like me when you're doing boat jobs, but there has been a bit of mission creep. It tends to happen when you have a slightly older boat and there are lots of jobs that you want to do. And I know I've been tidying up cables and fixing bits of headlining back there whilst I was there, but I've also got a Scanstrut USB 3 charging doodad. I fitted lots of these. It's got a little lift up cap which makes it fairly waterproof actually, because I think there's a rubber seal in there, and actually I'm lying to you, it's USB 3 and plain old USB. I don't know if you can see in there, but I'm tempted to stick this in whilst I'm doing some wiring stuff, because at the moment I've just got a cigarette lighter socket and I have to plug an adapter into that, and it'd be quite nice just to plug natively directly into this for faster charging of my devices. So there's a hole there. Ooh, and it nearly fits. There's an old hole I can reuse. That's always pleasing. Now all I can say is don't judge me on the wiring that you may or may not have seen in that hole. It is a bit of a mess. Everything works, everything's safe, but at some point I'm going to have to do something with it. But for right now, I just want to get it kind of in and working, and I'll probably revisit that when I do some other wiring stuff. I've switched it on. I heard a beep. I can see some lights on behind me on the NAC 2, so I'm going to take that as good news and go upstairs and see what I can do in terms of configuration. But first of all, I've got tools and things everywhere, and my dad's about to turn up for a cup of tea to have a look at my boat, so I better have a quick tidy up. The sun is shining and it would be an absolutely glorious day if it would just warm up a bit. It's about 1 o'clock now. I've just put some lunch in the oven, and that is to celebrate having a working Autopilot. So I've pretty much finished the install now, apart from the tuning. So down here, if I scroll you down a little bit, I've just installed this thing. I didn't record it because I was getting covered in goo and it was slightly frustrating trying to get this thing to fit, but actually it works quite well. If I pull the thing over, it flexes nicely with the movement of the arm. I've put a little cable tie around there to just to snug it up, but it still moves really easily. The other thing that I have done, which has improved it massively, is I've pumped it full of grease. Remember there was a grease nipple down there? Pump that full of grease, and this is considerably easier to move now. I think that was the key thing that I hadn't done. So I'm pretty happy with, you know, there's still some drag there, but it's not too bad. I think the thing is this tiller moved so freely because it had roller bearings rather than plain bearings. As soon as I attach anything to it, there's always going to be a bit of drag, but yeah, I'm very happy with that, and fingers crossed I've put enough sealant around that it won't leak. I've actually used silicone sealant on that, which I don't normally use, but it's highly likely that this is going to need to come off periodically just to put some more grease up into that grease nipple, so I didn't want anything too permanent. And of course here we have the pilot controls. So I've done the dockside wizard, basically the dockside setup, which is super simple. You just go through and move the tiller so it knows with the rudder reference where centre is, where fully over to port and fully over to starboard is, and go through a few other kind of basic things just to make sure that when you want it to turn right and left, it does exactly that. There is a ton of fine tuning that needs to happen, but I can't do that until I take it for a sail. The other thing I'm yet to do is there's a compass calibration that I need to do. So again, I really need some calm weather, and it's going to be a bit breezy to do that today, but I think it will do an auto calibration. But now if I hit auto, it now wants to steer the boat. So, so it is all working as it should. If I go plus 10, plus 20, it's pushing the tiller over to port so that the boat turns to starboard, and it's probably going to keep pushing it over to port because the boat isn't turning to starboard. So I'm going to hit it over onto standby, and of course that disengages the clutch, and I can then move the tiller as I want. So I've just switched it off, and of course there we go, disengaged. So it's all good. So what now needs to happen are some sea trials and some setup and tuning. I'm going to try and go for a sail today. I'm going to have some lunch and take some bravery pills because it is quite breezy, and this is still a fairly unknown boat to me, but fingers crossed I can get out if the tide isn't running through the moorings too much and go for a little sail just for a couple of hours because I've got limited time today, and I'm going to come back, and then I've got to take my mainsail off. And that's because the very nice people at Dolphin Sails contacted me and said, oh, we see you've got one of our old sails, that's fantastic. Can we help in any way? And I said, well, really, I need a second and a third reefing point in that sail. It's a fantastic regatta sail, but for the sort of sailing I want, I need a second and third reef. And they very kindly offered to do it for me. So thank you very much, Dolphin. I really appreciate it. Well, we are now off Southsea, so Portsmouth is over there, and I'm really pleased I made the effort. It is cold out here, I've got another jacket to put on, but we are sailing and we are trying out the Retro number 3. So this is the sail that I've just had modified, so I've had the battens changed to furling battens so that it will work on my furling system, and I wanted to try it out before I get it measured for my IRC certificate, because I think at the moment this is the sail that I'm going to have to use. But it has to be said, it's glorious out here, but I'm obviously testing the Pilot. So far so good, it's been absolutely faultless, has to be said. The response time maybe could be a little bit faster, but I just need to probably play with the settings. It's probably also settling down into how the boat performs. I've done the barest minimum in terms of setup, so I'm going to actually read the instructions. Sorry, a bit of sick came up. But once I've read the I word, I will hopefully have a better idea about what to do in terms of tuning. But essentially, I wanted to make sure it works, which it is. It's doing a fantastic job, and secondly, see how it performs in these sort of conditions. So, and I've just got to sail the boat. You know, I've just got to get out and enjoy it and learn how to tack it, learn how to jibe it, see what sort of boat speeds I want to be trying to use, and just put some miles on it, really. But if you think this is lovely, it really, really is. Whilst I'm recording this, I'm kind of thinking to myself how I'm going to go about best capturing the sailing when I'm out racing. I was quite impressed by some of the footage that the IMOCAs were producing during the Vendée Globe, and I know some of them have got some really clever video capture systems on their boats, so I'm going to possibly look into the kind of thing that they use, maybe, although I suspect they are very, very spendy. If you have any ideas beyond kind of just using GoPros and things like that, then I am all ears. I use currently an Insta360. I do have a cheap knockoff GoPro, but I might have to buy a better one. And I have my phone, which I'm speaking to you on now. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, or some good tips, I'm very happy to receive them. Well, I think I'm going to call this a very successful test run, both for the Autopilot and for the number 3 I've got up there. I've done a bit of beating, I've done a bit of tacking practice, and this is a beautiful boat to tack, it has to be said. I'm used to big overlapping head sails, and just having that little thing where you tack and go whoop, clack click on the winch, and it's basically in and done. It's revolutionary, love it. So yeah, I'm really, really pleased. The only issue that I have now had highlighted was when I was kind of expecting. I literally just had an alarm go off, and I've had to start the engine because my house battery was showing 10 volts. And I've only been sailing for half an hour maybe, tops. I haven't actually looked at the time. And so one battery has died after a very, very short period of time. So I was planning on doing a battery upgrade. I think that's going to have to happen sooner rather than later, because otherwise I'm going to be having to contact race organisers and say, is that okay if I run my engine whilst sailing? I promise I will not have it in gear, but I have battery issues, and a single lead acid 85 amp hour battery, which is probably a few years old, is just not going to do the job. So I could swap it out for a new one, but that's really only a sticking plaster when you have a Pilot like this and all the electronics running for a period of time. 35 amp hours of usable battery is nowhere near enough for a boat of this size. So I'm going to be getting probably a lithium upgrade on this boat very, very soon. It's also because I'm used to the way lithium batteries work. I'm used to just having quite a big battery bank on the boats that I've had in the past, and so it's really weird to go back to lead acid when you just basically are used to not worrying about battery capacity. Anyway, this has been a very successful weekend. The boat is going really nicely with the pilot. I am going to tweak with some of the settings, but actually not very much. It seems to be okay, but I'm sure the more I sail the boat in different conditions, the more I will learn about how the pilot responds. I will at some point need to replace that little carbon fibre bracket with a stainless steel one, and I will get one made. I'm going to have to make a template up, but I may not have time for that today. But I'd just like to thank you very, very much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. I love sharing this journey with you of buying a really quite old, tired performance cruiser racer and bringing her back up to speed so I can go racing in her this year. And obviously there's some tweaks and mods that I'm doing on the boat to kind of make it more appropriate for the solo racing that I have planned. So thanks for watching. If you want to give me a thumbs up, that makes a massive difference, and do subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I must again thank those of you that support the show using the link that is down in the description, the PayPal link, where you can buy me a beer. And all those beer tokens help fund this channel. They fund the storage, they fund the cameras, the microphones, all that sort of stuff. And occasionally there's a few beer tokens left over for beers or bits for this boat. Thank you again. See you next time. Bye for now.